When my parents promoted my brother to CEO of the restaurant I had been running for 11 years, I put down my knives and quit. Just a week later they lost the $850,000 deal I had secured. I told them, "Take it up with your CEO." It was late, almost midnight, when I walked into the kitchen and saw the papers spread across the table. A half-empty bottle of whiskey stood like a proud soldier beside them, its smell heavy in the air. He didn't look up at me right away. He was too busy dragging the pen across the page, pressing harder than necessary, the tip of it scratching like nails on glass. And then I noticed it. My name is Arya. 11 years of my life, erased in one bold stroke of his pen. The business we built together now carried only his signature, his claim. My hands froze on the back of the chair. For a second I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe he had left me a line to sign. But no. My chair was empty, just like my space on those documents. What would you do if your own family betrayed you after 11 years of loyalty? Stay with me because this revenge story will leave you breathless. You're still up, I said quietly, my voice flat, controlled. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. He glanced at me then, his eyes glassy from the drink, his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. It's cleaner this way, he said. Less complicated. Less complicated. That's what he called it, cutting me out of the very place I had poured my blood into. The restaurant had been my second home. I had designed the menu, trained the staff, built relationships with vendors who trusted me more than him. But in that moment none of it mattered. According to him I was nothing more than clutter. I walked slowly to the counter, picked up the coffee pot and poured myself the last of the bitter brew. It was cold, thick at the bottom. I didn't care. I needed something to keep my hands steady. My reflection in the kitchen window stared back at me, tired eyes, hair pulled loose from a bun, the faint smear of flour still on my sleeve. I looked like a woman who had been working all day, and yet here I was, watching my life signed away on a cheap wooden table. The house was too quiet. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked above the sink, and the only other sound was the scratch of his pen. That rhythm dug into me more than any yelling could. After everything? I asked finally, my words low, almost drowned out by the clock. He didn't even flinch. You'll still have your name on the walls, he muttered, as if that was enough. As if a painted sign could replace 11 years of sacrifice. I leaned against the counter, gripping the mug so tightly I could feel the heat through the ceramic. I didn't shout. I didn't slam anything. I watched him, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his fingers twitched after every signature. He wasn't confident, he was scared. And I knew exactly why. Because the truth was, the restaurant wasn't his. Not really. The people who made it successful, the vendors, the customers, the staff, they weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to me. He just didn't know it yet. I let silence fill the room. He hated silence. He thrived on noise, on controlling conversations, on making sure his voice was the loudest. But that night, the silence pressed down until even he shifted uncomfortably. Why now? I asked, setting the mug down carefully. He looked up at me, his expression harder now. Because I'm done waiting. I'm done letting you run things your way. I need control. There it was, the truth slipping out like steam from a cracked pipe. Control. That's all it had ever been about. Not the food, not the customers, not the family name on the building. Just control. I studied him carefully. The yellow light from the ceiling lamp made the sweat on his forehead glisten. His shirt was wrinkled, a dark stain spread across the pocket where he had spilled something earlier. And then I smelled it, faint but there. Not whiskey. Not food. Perfume. Sweet, sharp, unfamiliar. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face calm. You smell different, I said softly. His pen froze. For just a second he looked guilty. Then he recovered, forced a laugh, shook his head. You're imagining things. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The lie was enough. I gathered the dinner plates from the sink, moving slowly, deliberately. The clink of dishes was the only sound as I rinsed them and placed them on the rack. Every motion gave me time to think, to measure my breathing, to bury the fire rising inside me. He thought he was ending me that night. What he didn't know was that I had already started writing the next chapter. When I set the last plate down, I turned back toward him. He was still bent over the papers, his hand cramping from the pressure of his own greed. The sight almost made me smile. You think this makes you stronger? I asked, tilting my head, keeping my voice steady. He didn't look up. It makes things easier, he said. I stepped closer to the table, close enough to see the ink bleeding into the fibers of the cheap paper. Close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. I placed my hand on the back of the chair across from him. That's where you're wrong, I whispered. His eyes finally met mine then just for a moment. I didn't blink. I wanted him to see the steadiness, the quiet storm gathering behind my calm expression. The clock above the sink ticked once, twice, 3 times. He looked away first. And that was all I needed. The clock above the sink ticked 3 more times after he looked away first. That sound followed me down the hallway like footsteps I couldn't shake. I didn't slam a door, didn't shout, didn't demand answers. I simply went upstairs, my body heavy but my mind sharp. The house felt hollow, like every room had been stripped of air. And that silence, his silence, my silence, hung between us thicker than smoke. The next morning he left before sunrise. I heard the tires crunch down the gravel driveway, the engine fade into the distance. He didn't even take his coffee mug. The cup sat on the counter, a ring of brown dried inside it. That little detail said more than any fight could. He wasn't avoiding me. He was erasing me. I went about my chores in a rhythm that felt unnatural. Watering the plants, folding the laundry, scrubbing the sink until my knuckles turned raw. Each task louder in my head than it should have been. The broom dragging across the floor sounded like thunder. The faucet dripping became a drumbeat. It was all too loud yet too empty at the same time. By mid-morning I walked into town for groceries. The bell above the store door jingled and I saw familiar faces. People who had eaten at our restaurant for years. People who knew me smiled at me. But something was different. A neighbor patted my hand and asked, "Haven't seen you around the place lately. Everything all right?" I forced a smile but my throat tightened. "Just taking some time," I said. "Short, careful." But their eyes lingered longer than usual, as if they already suspected something. Whispers spread faster than spilled wine, and in a small town silence is never really silent. It hums, it stirs, it carries questions. Later that week I walked past the restaurant, scarf pulled tight around my hair, my steps slow enough to watch but quick enough not to be seen. Through the window I noticed half-empty tables. The hum of chatter that used to spill out onto the street was gone. The neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering like a candle about to die. The staff looked different too. Some leaned against counters, some whispered behind menus, their energy dulled. And then I saw one of the waitresses, Mary, a girl I had trained myself. She looked toward the door as if expecting me to walk in, her eyes scanning the street. I stepped back into the shadows before she could see me. That's when I realized it. My absence wasn't quiet. It was loud. Louder than any argument we could have had. Louder than him signing those papers. The restaurant wasn't built on his name, no matter how much ink he poured onto those documents. It was built on mine. The following Sunday I sat on the porch with my neighbor Carol, who'd brought me a basket of muffins. She sipped her tea and leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I heard from my cousin, vendors are pulling back. They don't want to renew contracts until they speak with you." I froze, muffin halfway to my mouth. That was the first real confirmation. It wasn't just in my head. People were noticing. People were waiting. I set the muffin down carefully and nodded. "Well," I said slowly, "maybe they'll get tired of waiting." But I didn't believe that. And she didn't either. Carol gave me that look women give each other when the truth is too big to put into words. That night, lying in bed, I listened to the faint rumble of his car pulling back into the driveway. He came in late, thinking I was asleep. I heard his shoes hit the floor, the belt buckle clink against the dresser. I smelled that perfume again, sweeter, stronger this time. He didn't notice I was awake, breathing slow, eyes shut. The silence between us grew its own shape, its own presence. It was no longer empty. It was crowded with secrets. His secrets. And mine. A week later at the post office I bumped into Joe, the man who supplied our produce for years. He was holding back a letter at the counter, tapping it against his palm. "You're a hard woman to find these days," he said. I smiled politely, but before I could respond he leaned in. "You let me know what's going on. I'm holding my trucks until I hear it from you." His voice carried weight. Trucks meant produce. Produce meant kitchens running. Kitchens running meant customers fed. If Joe was pausing, others would follow. Walking home that day I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger. Not grief. Something calmer, sharper. I didn't need to fight him in that kitchen weeks ago. I didn't need to scream. My silence had already begun doing the work for me. That evening I cooked dinner for myself. Just one plate. The scrape of the fork on ceramic echoed in the room. I looked at the empty chair across the table, and for the first time in years, it didn't ache. It didn't feel lonely. It felt purposeful. I glanced at the clock. 8:07. I imagined the restaurant across town. Dim tables, customers asking questions he couldn't answer. Maybe someone even walking out saying, "It's not the same without her." The silence after betrayal is louder than any fight. And it was spreading. Through the staff, through the vendors, through the customers. One evening as I watered the front porch plants, Mary, the waitress, stopped by. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. "We miss you," she whispered. "It's different there. People ask for you. They don't understand why you're gone." Her eyes searched mine, waiting for me to give an explanation, but I didn't. Instead, I touched her arm lightly and said, "Sometimes people show who they are when you step out of the room." She left with her head low, and I knew the message would carry back inside the walls of that restaurant without me ever stepping foot in it. That night, sitting on my porch with the cicadas buzzing in the distance, I finally allowed myself a small smile. He thought signing my name off those papers ended me. He thought silence would keep me small, invisible. But silence wasn't my weakness. It was my weapon. And it was only just beginning to echo. The echo carried me into the following week, into mornings where I'd sit on the porch with a notebook open on my lap, the ink pen resting in my fingers. Not to journal. Not to weep. To list. Every habit of his. Every weakness he thought he hid. I began writing them down like coins dropped into a jar. Small, clinking truths that would one day add up to something heavy enough to crush him. The first coin was debt. I found the envelopes stuffed between his shirts in the dresser, creased and greasy at the edges. The handwriting on the outside screamed "Final Notice," but he'd tucked them away like they'd disappear if I didn't see them. Creditors, casinos, names of places I had never stepped foot in but that he frequented after closing hours. I held the papers in my hands and thought, "You don't erase a woman like me and keep your secrets safe." The second coin was the mistress. I didn't need to follow him to know her schedule. Women like her always left traces. Receipts in the glove box, a faint lipstick stain on his napkin, perfume that lingered too sweet, too sharp, impossible to scrub out of the fibers of his shirt. But one evening as I stood in line at the pharmacy, I saw her. Young, nervous, holding a bottle of aspirin and a glossy magazine. She didn't notice me, but I noticed her. The way she tapped her card twice before it went through, the way her hands shook when she stuffed the receipt into her purse. That told me everything. She wasn't with him because of power. She was with him because she needed something from him. And women who need are unreliable allies. The third coin was pride. He talked too much. Even when no one asked. At the gas station, I overheard him telling the clerk about plans to expand next year, about new investors coming in, about how the business was all his. His voice was loud, boastful, like he was trying to convince himself it was true. Pride is a fragile coin, one that cracks in your hand if you hold it too tightly. I tucked that weakness into my jar with the others. The fourth coin was the staff. I ran into Peter, our old cook, outside the hardware store. He asked me how I was, his words careful, respectful. And then he sighed, rubbed the back of his neck and said, "It's not the same without you. The food's fine, but it doesn't feel right." I just nodded, but inside another coin dropped into my jar. Loyalty. Not to him. To me. The fifth coin was time. Time has a way of exposing men who build on shaky ground. The longer I stayed quiet, the more cracks I saw in his foundation. The bills stacked higher. The staff grew restless. Customers drifted. And every night he came home later, shoulders heavier, eyes more sunken. He thought I wasn't watching. But I saw it all. One afternoon I took a walk past the bank. Not because I needed anything but because I wanted to test a theory. Inside, the manager spotted me, came right over, shaking my hand warmly. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. "How's everything at the restaurant?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, I asked one of my own. "Would you lend money to a man who signed his wife out of her own business?" The manager's smile faltered, just slightly. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Another coin. Trust slipping from him and falling back to me. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. The jar in my mind grew heavier. I could almost hear the clinking of those coins each time I turned a page. I wrote names, dates, patterns. I wrote the things he thought were invisible. And as I did, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't powerless. I was collecting. But weakness isn't just found in paper and gossip. Sometimes it walks through your door. One rainy night he stumbled in late. His shirt collar stained, his tie hanging loose. He smelled of whiskey and that same perfume. He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I watched from the shadows of the hallway as he dropped onto the couch, head in his hands. And then I saw it, his phone lighting up with a message. I didn't touch it, didn't move. But from where I stood, I caught enough of the glow to read the words. Did you tell her yet? I stepped back into the darkness before he could see me. My heart didn't race. My breathing didn't quicken. Instead, I felt another coin slide into my jar. Secrets between him and her. Secrets that would come undone at the seams. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the weight of everything I knew, everything I kept hidden behind a calm face and steady voice. A few days later, Mary, the waitress, came by again. This time she looked more desperate. He's making changes, she whispered. Cutting corners. Switching suppliers. People are noticing. Her voice trembled, like she was afraid even the air might carry her words back to him. I reached out, touched her arm gently. You're stronger than you think, I told her. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting. Sometimes it's about watching and waiting. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't understand fully. Not yet. After she left, I sat back down at my table. My notebook lay open, the list growing longer by the day. His debts. His mistress. His pride. His failing staff. His secrets. Each one stacked neatly like coins in a jar, each one making him weaker without him realizing it. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to throw a single punch. All I needed was patience. Because the truth is, men like him don't collapse from one heavy blow. They collapse from the weight of their own coins. Every weakness they try to hide, every flaw they refuse to see. And I was holding the jar. That thought stayed with me as I walked into the small, empty storefront 1 block from our old restaurant. The air smelled of dust and fresh paint, the kind that clings to your clothes no matter how quickly you leave. My footsteps echoed on the bare floorboards. It wasn't much to look at, just 4 walls, a counter, and a window that faced directly across the street. But I didn't need much. I needed a place with a door, a stove, and my name on the lease. I pressed the key into the lock for the first time, and when it clicked, I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just a door. This was a declaration. He had signed me out of his papers, but here he couldn't touch me. The first night I cleaned until my back ached. I scrubbed the counters, wiped the windows, pulled weeds from the sidewalk. My hands burned from bleach, but I didn't stop. I wanted the place to smell like beginnings, not endings. When Mary came by the next day, she stood in the doorway wide-eyed. "You're really doing this," she whispered. I smiled, though my knees shook from exhaustion. "Yes. But not the way he thinks." She offered to help after her shifts, and she wasn't the only one. One by one, old staff members trickled in. Peter with his recipes, Carla with her steady hands at the register, even Joe the produce man, grinning as he carried in a crate of fresh tomatoes. I didn't need to beg. They came willingly. Loyalty doesn't vanish with ink on paper. It lives in the way people remember who fed them, who listened, who treated them like they mattered. By the time the sign went up, just simple black letters with my name, the whispers in town had grown into a hum. People asked questions at the grocery store, in church pews, at the bank counter. "When's it opening? Will the menu be the same? We've missed your cooking." Each word wrapped around me like armor. The night before opening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house, every drip of the faucet. Across the street, his restaurant lights still flickered weakly. I imagined him pacing inside, barking at staff, clutching papers he no longer understood. And then came the night. Opening night. I stood behind the counter as the first customers walked in. My heart thudded so hard I thought they could hear it. But then someone laughed, an easy, warm laugh I hadn't heard in months, and suddenly the room filled with life. Plates clattered, forks scraped, voices rose in conversation. The smell of fresh bread rolled out onto the street. Through the wide front window I could see his restaurant. Half-empty tables. A hostess staring at the floor. The contrast was stark, undeniable. At one point I caught sight of him stepping outside, his face pale under the neon buzz. He stared across the street at the glowing sign with my name, at the people spilling out of my doorway. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment our eyes met across the distance. Neither of us moved. Neither of us blinked. Inside, Peter nudged me. "It's working," he said quietly. But it wasn't just working. It was reclaiming. Later that night, as I wiped down tables, an investor approached me. One who had once shaken his hand, not mine. He set his card on the counter and said, "We'd like to talk. You've got something worth backing here." I didn't reach for the card right away. I let it sit there, let the weight of it hang in the air. Because this wasn't just business. It was balance being restored. By midnight, when the last customer left, I stepped outside to lock the door. Across the street, his restaurant was dark, chairs stacked on tables, windows bare. My sign glowed above me, steady and bright. And then I saw him. He crossed the street slowly, his shoulders hunched, his face flushed with something between anger and disbelief. He stopped just a few feet from me, his voice rough. "You think this is yours?" I held the key in my hand, twisting it in the lock. My voice came steady low. "No. I know it's mine." His jaw tightened, eyes darting to the crowd still lingering near my doorway, laughing, chatting, holding takeout bags. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. I stepped closer, close enough that he could see the calm in my face, the steadiness he never managed to shake. "This isn't about stealing or winning," I whispered. "This is about taking back what I built. What you thought you could erase." For the first time in years, he didn't have a response. He just stood there, breathing hard, fists at his sides, while my sign glowed brighter behind me. I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned, slipped inside, and closed the door. The lock clicked into place, louder than any slam. That was the night I took back what was mine. And the silence on his side of the street told me he knew it too. The click of that lock echoed in my ears long after I turned the key. I leaned against the door, the cool glass pressing against my back, and let the silence settle. Out there, he was still standing on the sidewalk, shifting from foot to foot, hands curled like he might pound on the door. But he didn't. He couldn't. For the first time in years, I realized he had no power left. Inside, the air still smelled of bread and garlic, the warmth of the ovens lingering in the corners. My staff, my family really, was laughing softly as they stacked chairs and folded aprons. I could hear Mary humming, a little off-key but sweet as ever. They didn't notice him outside, and I didn't tell them. That moment was mine. Mine alone. The next morning, the papers carried a story. Not mine, his. An article buried on page 3 of the local section. Long-standing family restaurant struggles after management change. A polite way of saying people had stopped coming. They printed a picture of him standing stiff in front of the old sign, eyes hollow. I clipped the article and slid it into a drawer. Not to gloat, but to remind myself. Proof. Over the next weeks, the divide grew sharper. My place was packed nightly, the sound of clinking glasses spilling out onto the street. Empty tables, staff quitting one by one. Word spread that suppliers were pulling back too. Late payments, broken promises. Joe, the produce man, told me with a shrug. He still owes me for last month. I don't deliver to ghosts. I didn't have to lift a finger. His collapse came on its own, steady and certain, like a slow leak you can't patch. But closure didn't come easy. One evening, close to midnight, I stepped outside after locking up and saw him again. He sat across the street on the curb, his shoulders slumped, a bottle dangling from his hand. The neon sign above his place flickered and died, leaving him in shadow. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken, almost childlike. He noticed me, tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then hoarse. "It took everything." I crossed my arms, not moving from my doorway. "No. You gave it away." His laugh was broken, jagged. "You were supposed to need me." That stung, though I didn't let it show. As once it was true. Once I believed I couldn't run things without him. But time had stripped that lie bare. "I never needed you," I said softly. "You needed me. That's why you tried to sign me away." For a moment he just stared. Then he lowered his head, shoulders shaking, and I realized it wasn't laughter. It was something closer to sobbing. I didn't cross the street. I didn't comfort him. That wasn't my role anymore. Instead, I turned, went back inside, and left him with his silence. Because closure doesn't come from fighting. It doesn't come from shouting or even from saying all the things you wish you'd said years earlier. Closure comes when you see the truth play out with your own eyes. And I was watching it every single night. Weeks turned into months. My diner became more than a restaurant. It became a gathering place. Families celebrated birthdays there. Couples lingered over dessert. Strangers struck up conversations at the counter. And every time someone smiled and said, "It feels like home here," I knew I had won something deeper than money or reputation. Meanwhile, his place shuttered. The windows boarded up, the sign removed. A for lease notice fluttered in the wind. People walked past without even glancing. He had tried to erase me and in the end erased himself. The last time I saw him he was at the bank. I was standing in line with Mary, depositing a week's worth of earnings. He shuffled out of the manager's office, a stack of papers clutched in his hand, face pale as chalk. "Foreclosure papers," I guessed. He glanced up and saw me. For one heartbeat we locked eyes. There was no anger left in him. No arrogance, no fire. Just emptiness. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked back, steady and calm, and then turned to Mary, asking about her grandson's baseball game. That was all. Because he wasn't the center of my story anymore. Walking out of that bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. Lighter than I had even on opening night. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. Still, when I passed his old place on my way home, I paused. The windows reflected the sunset, streaks of orange and pink across the empty glass. For a second, I thought of all the nights I'd worked in that kitchen, all the sweat and heart I'd poured into those walls. I thought of the betrayal, the papers he signed at that kitchen table, the way my name looked when he crossed it out. And then I thought of my diner, full of laughter and life, carrying my name in bright letters that no one could take away. Closure isn't about winning, I realized. It's about standing still long enough to watch the person who wronged you crumble under the weight of their own choices. It's about breathing freely while they choke on silence. That night I walked past his darkened doorway and didn't look back. Because closure had already come. And it was louder than any fight. If this story struck a chord with you, subscribe for more powerful revenge stories where betrayal meets justice. Your story deserves to be heard too.